go. Well, a very, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's reading. It is an exceptional opportunity when we can feature a beautiful piece of work, and to have the author on board with us is a true honor. I have enjoyed getting to know Audrey and getting to know Gary over this voyage, hearing more about the story, not only of the Circus of the Queens, but also what brought the Queens to life. I have been amazed by this woman's story, the challenges that were put in front of her, and how even though we think that our lives are all figured out, all it takes is one moment for it all to change. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Audrey Berger Welts.
Hello. But I'm going to start actually with a song. My best friend tells me that all the things that I do sound better after a song. So this is called Twisted. Then we'll get into the reading. My analyst told me that I was right out of my head, the way he described it. He said I'd be better dead than alive. I didn't listen to his jive. I knew all along he was all wrong, and I knew that he thought I was crazy, but I'm not, oh no. My analyst told me that I was right out of my head. He said I need treatment, but I'm not so easily led. He said I was the type that was most inclined, went out of his sight to be out of my mind. And he thought I was nuts, no more ifs or ands or buts. They say as a child I appeared a little bit wild with all my crazy ideas. But I knew what was happening, I knew I was a genius. What's so strange when you know that you're a wizard at 3? I knew that this was meant to be. Now I heard little children were supposed to sleep tight. That's why I got into the vodka one night. My parents got frantic, didn't know what to do. But I saw some crazy things before I came to. Now, do you think I was crazy? I might have been only 3, but I was swinging. They all laugh at angry young men. They all laugh at Edison and also at Einstein. So why should I feel sorry if they just didn't understand the idiomatic logic that went on in my head? I had a brain, it was insane. Oh, they used to laugh at me when I refused to ride on all those double-decker buses, all because there was no driver on the top. Gary, your part.
No driver on the top. That shit's twisted.
My analyst told me that I was right out of my head. He said I need treatment, but I'm not so easily led. He said I was the type that was most inclined, went out of his sight to be out of my mind. And he thought I was nuts, no more ifs or ands or buts. It is said that the elephant is a cousin to the clouds and has the ability to cause lightning. Macon, Georgia, 1917. I could hear our Tiger's midnight satin being loaded onto the train as I pulled my old purple shawl tighter around my shoulders and stretched my hands out towards the fire. Lately, Vladimir and I had been staying up till the small hours most nights. We take folding chairs outside our carriages to watch the glow of the embers, tell stories, and play cards. We'd say it was the creaking of the big top in the wind that kept us awake, but it wasn't. It was our need to talk about our Russia, our childhood, and remind ourselves that the memories we shared had once been our reality. Your mother was a great dancer, Donatella, Vladimir said that night. when we turned over the last card and fallen silent. Fallen silent. But then he frowned as if he hadn't said enough. Every move you make tells a story, my mother would say. Then she would glide like a seagull through our front door to show me all I ever wanted was to be her. I stretched my arms and I sighed. The circus had been in Macon the last few days, and soon we'd be poling out. Exhausted, I start to drift, as if I were floating on a raft through the evening sky. I take a deep breath and I close my eyes. Memories surround me like fireflies and stars on a hot moonless night. And through the sea of flickering lights, I find myself seated on an overstuffed velvet chair in the parlor of my family's home in St. Petersburg, on an avenue lined with elegant houses just like ours. If I listen carefully, I can hear the clap, clap, clap of steel on stone and the sound of squeaky wheels of late-night carriages going up and down our street. I can see the gold embroidered crimson curtain at the Mariinsky Theater rising, and I can feel the weight of my mother's soft hand squeezing mine. It's spring, and I'm wearing the silky dress dyed to match the purple-violet tulips that are growing in our garden. The orchestra is playing like it's dizzy until each instrument finds its place and settles in. The theater is still, but not for long. The theater is still, but not for long. The conductor walks out to a roar of applause, then nods to the musicians with the wave of his baton. Perfect notes surround me. Tchaikovsky's Queen of Spades. What an odd coincidence, I think now. Take off my shoes, they're too big for you, my mother teased when we came home that night. The shoes she wore were sparkly, and I couldn't resist trying them on. How I loved the way she tickled my belly until I giggled so hard I threw them on the floor. You could trip and fall, she said, laughing, and then what kind of dancer would you be? She took out her prized, hammered silver box that held her abalone hairbrush. Its swirls of iridescent blue brought out the color of my eyes, she said. Then she stroked my long, dark, wavy hair. 1, 2, 3, 100 times. As a child, that's how I learned to count. My name is Donatella Petrovskaya. I wasn't always in the circus. Born in St. Petersburg, I was christened Donna Natalia, and I attended the Imperial Theatrical School. I even studied under the great Conchetti and performed at the Winter Palace while the Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich played the flute. But that was before he went into hiding.
And that ends chapter 1, where we've met Donatalia and Vladimir, our two main characters, who I have to tell you, I was so surprised at this point of the book because I thought I knew how this story was going to go. But I was completely wrong.
Yes, you were.
I was. You began our time together with a song.
Yes.
Music therapy has become something that was very important to you.
Well, music has always been important to me. I sang for a long time. My parents were both musicians. It just ran in the family, and I just have to sing. But I also found that it really started helping my Parkinson's symptoms. And music is a community kind of experience. to where it brings people together. And it doesn't matter whether you have tremors, whether you're shaking, whether you're walking into a room in a wheelchair. Once people get singing, it's universal, and it brings everyone together. The other thing is that with Parkinson's, there are respiratory problems. And with singing, you practice all this breathing. There's so many different things that it helps. I won't get into all of them. But yes, I started a workshop called Sing for Your Health in New York with a friend of mine, Dana Calitri. And we're sponsored by US World Meds. And it's been really special. I never thought I'd be doing anything like that.
Absolutely. We touched on this a little bit when I interviewed you for the television show. The Parkinson's was one thing, but then there was a catastrophic aneurysm. And
God's been good to me, which he has, or she has. But I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2008. They think I've had it since about the year 2000. And then almost 4 years, it'll be 4 years this December, I had an aneurysm rupture. And I came very close to, well, they didn't expect me to live. And I was in a coma for a long time.
Almost a month.
Yeah, 21 days. And just trying to come out of that has been a long process. But I feel very, very grateful. Look, I'm here. And I got up on the stage.
Yes, you did.
It was hard, but I did it.
Where were you in the writing process when the aneurysm struck?
I was very close to finish with Circus. A lot of it changed afterwards, but I was about 3/4 of the way done. And when I was in a coma, I could actually see it. I could see it was in a triangle and surrounded by a circle, encompassed by a square. And it was as if I was reading it from my computer. And I wanted the doctors to know that the same person who wrote this beautiful book was the person that was lying on their table, unable to move or speak.
That is amazing. Shall we go back to the Queens?
Sure. In our prime, the Circus of the Queens had 24 train cars, including 6 sleepers and several tableau wagons of ornate design. In each town we visited, the festivities began with a parade. The Windjammer Band would march down Main Street with a calliope not far behind. A clown riding a brightly dressed, floppy-eared donkey doubled as security. The horses and camels had names like Nellie and Conchita. The tigers were Midnight, Satin, and Baby. Before its show was a promenade of clowns, red-nosed funmakers riding unicycles, while their dancing dogs did somersaults and dives. Our collection of clowns, trapeze artists, equestrians, high-wire acts was larger than our menagerie of exotic animals. Many other circuses had more, but we had something they didn't: history and myth.
I love this. With the circus, we're going out of order a little bit in the book. We just wanted to give you a couple of tastes of different scenes. But this circus becomes a family for Donatalia, who we now know as Donatella.
It becomes something, it's very relevant to what's going on in the world today. We're dealing with, there's immigrants, there's people having to find new homes and create new homes. Much of what people were dealing with at this particular time is something that many part of the people in the world are dealing with now, and all of us if we open our eyes.
She was shaped by the many women who came through her life, not only her
Right.
mother, who she wanted desperately to be just like, but other women, including a woman that she meets on a train coming
Irina.
from New York.
On our 20-minute journey, we honked hello. This is after she meets this woman, Irina, and is going back with her to her home that she has with Colonel Butler. On our 20-minute journey, we honked hello to several other automobiles that looked just like hers. Finally, we pulled into a long driveway that would take us to Colonel Butler's farm. At the end of the drive was a mansion draped in what Mrs. Butler had described as Spanish moss. It was flanked by weeping willow trees, so lovely I could barely speak. An elegant porch wrapped around the house, its roof supported by the grand white pillars so typical of the South. On it hung 2 swings, one facing east towards the Butler's tobacco, the other facing the cotton fields towards the west. After the Civil War, Mrs. Butler told me, the colonel had been so sick of the division between North and South that he moved his porch swings so they would face east and west. The eastern swing represented prosperity, and the western swing opportunity, and the north and south, well, they just weren't going to get any more of his attention. And there I planted myself, surrounded by cotton, tobacco, and soft southern voices.
That is so beautiful. She truly makes a journey, even just in the first chapters of the book. Has anyone else started reading it besides me yet? It is amazing to me how much of a journey she's made just even in the first 30% of the book, and how life throws roadblocks in her way. But every time she manages to find a new way around or to reinvent herself.
I think I was teaching myself the path that I was going to have to take before I knew it was going to happen.
You said that most of this book was written before the aneurysm, and that
Yes.
you did see it all play out in your head. Afterwards, when we were talking yesterday, you said that you and Gary have gone back and just picked random pages.
We have a game that we play with each other, and we'll just like call out a number, 86, and then I'll go to page 86 of the book, and I would read the page and see if it made us laugh or cry, or if it affected us in some sort of emotional level, whether it was meaningful. And then he'd go, 125, and turn to that page. And we carried on that game for about a year. It was really fun.
It is interesting how the small details leap out at you when you read or when you reread. Even just now, rereading and listening to you read with Tchaikovsky's Queen of Spades. You picked a piece of music that at that time would have been playing on the stage by the orchestra. But did it occur to you how poignant Queen of Spades would be?
Not when I was in the coma, but I actually had that part written out before then. But the thing is that what I found, I believe the story was channeled to me, that I just listened to something deeper inside of myself that allowed me to write something that I didn't know I could write. The other thing is that things just fell into place in a weird kind of way, like I was looking for something later in the book. I don't want to give something away, but one of the characters is in New York, and I was looking for a Broadway play, and it just ended up that it was the same year that Jumbo came out. And there was, at the end of each performance, there was Jimmy Durante with an elephant's foot resting on his head. But it was funny. There was something about the circus that fit in beautifully with my character.
Well, at that time, at the 1900s, the turn of the century, the circus was something that was very important, and important in the South where she was, from Savannah all the way down to New Orleans, the different families that were involved. And we feature very specifically with the Vronsky family from St. Petersburg that Donatalia grew up with and is reunited with.
It's a family saga. It's a coming-of-age story. It's historical fiction. I try to stick the historical material into the book without getting it bogged down with so many details that you would feel you need an encyclopedia or a dictionary next to you.
Well, and that does bring us to the Russian Revolution, the reason that Donatalia was sent away from Russia by her father. Her father was a very important businessman in the textile industry in
St.
Petersburg, and he had connections with people in Savannah who were in the cotton industry.
Yes.
And he sent her away, and that was not something that she wanted. You wrote, "My father wanted to escort me to my cabin, but I wouldn't let him. I knew I was being cruel, but I couldn't help myself. If I'm grown up enough to make this trip on my own, I might as well start practicing now," I said. Then I looked up into his sad eyes and I let him hug me. I buried my face in his fine wool overcoat, which smelled of sweet pipe tobacco that he loved, and washed my face with tears. A steward took my trunk for me, and I followed him up the gangplank. At the top, I asked him to take my trunk to my stateroom. I found an empty spot along the crowded railing of that passenger deck, and I looked for my father. He was easy to find in his formal black coat, white waistcoat, and dapper top hat, his face lifted toward me, his hand raised. I leaned over the railing as far as I could and waved at him. The whistle blew. Steam billowed from the funnels. Water churned white behind the ship, and the pier began to slide away. My father grew smaller and smaller. Suddenly, I felt a stab of regret. All those hours walking on the ship, our dinner in Hamburg, I had wasted the last time I had with him, trapped in my own resentment. Now he was only a speck on the pier, lost in the crowd, and we were both all alone in the world.
There's one reading here that I'd like to do that kind of goes with that. This is after Donatella's been in the States for a while, but she goes back to Savannah when everything seems to fall apart in her life again. I walked through fields, along lanes, through piney woods and under oaks. I walked until my head was empty and my feet were numb. It was the only thing I knew to do. I walked and I walked for weeks, maybe months, until the spirit of Irina appeared. I was hiking on a slippery trail near a stream when I tripped over a root and landed on top of one good luck clover. Covered in mud, I didn't feel so lucky. I started to cry, thinking about all the things that had gone wrong in my life. Then the wind began to blow, and it picked up speed until the rustling of the leaves sounded like a percussion section in an orchestra. Through the steady brushing of the snare drum, I thought I heard Irina speak to me. I couldn't make out her words, but I could feel her embrace. "I'm so sorry," I started sobbing to myself. How could I have been so cruel, so ungrateful? My heart seemed to split in two. All that I had been holding in for years seemed to burst out, and I poured out my troubles to the forest and the trees. And when not a tear was left, and I was thoroughly exhausted, I picked up the clover and I asked it for help. Nothing again. Then I asked for help again, only this time I got down on one knee. Nothing again. Desperate, I held the clover between my thumb and my forefinger, and I asked God to let me witness grace in a physical form. Give me something to believe, I said to the clover. I stood up and wiped the dirt off my face. Out of nowhere, 3 hummingbirds appeared. They circled around my head as if it were a pot full of honeysuckle nectar. After showing off their tricks, they flew backwards as only hummingbirds can, and they flitted and they fluttered from one flower to another, flirting with nature all the while. Seconds seemed like minutes, and each time the hummingbirds returned, they circled my head. Through the leaves on the trees, I heard a whisper once more, reminding me that the hummingbird is a symbol of energy. Then, as if the song of their wings had transformed me into a bird, I flew home as fast as I could. I knew exactly what I was meant to do.
I love that. I knew exactly what I was meant to do. And she did. It has been a fascinating book. I'm about 30, maybe 40% of the way through it. I can't wait for you all to go on tour in St. Petersburg because I am going to lock myself in my room and read this book. That is a luxury for me. But while you're in St. Petersburg, you're going to be walking in these places. You're going to Mariinsky to see the ballet.
Right. It's if anyone would have told me last year that this year at this time I'd be sitting here talking to you, that I'd be going to Donatello's home, that any of this would be happening, I couldn't have imagined it.
And the character was at the Winter Palace dancing before the revolution. Her mother would have danced.
Right.
On those stages as well.
They attended the Imperial Theatrical School. I mean, there's all sorts of
connections.
Exactly.
And while they are in the South, they're listening around the radio to what's happening at home in Russia during the revolution.
You got to that part.
Oh, I'm well past that part. It's been great as she and I have been having conversations because she keeps saying, I don't want to tell you what happens next. Any other questions? Yes. How did you choose where the characters were set, either in St. Petersburg or in the South? Is there a connection?
I've got little connections with. Well, my mother was Russian, but her father ran away from Russia to escape the Tsar's army. I was writing about a class of people that I had no experience with. I was writing about lots of things that I didn't know that I had to read, and I've always had a good imagination. And one thing would lead to another. I mean, that's the thing, is that you find one thing that's interesting, and then you want to find more to back it up, and then you find that you're completely off of where you began. But they appealed to my imagination is the only thing that I can say about that.
The end of times in St. Petersburg before the revolution, so opulent. Even her upbringing was an elevated one. The Vronsky family, the circus family, they were circus royalty.
Well, what's interesting is I'm writing a sequel right now. I'm about 222 pages into it, typing it like this. But it gets more into what was going on in the revolution, what was going on in the Tsar's house, and a little bit of Rasputin in there, and just the fact that they were going at things pretty hot and heavy during the time before the revolution broke out.
The subject of the prequel is the shadow of Lilia. You'll get to know Lilia as you are reading The Circus of the Queens. Lilia is Vladimir's mother.
Yes.
And she was an equestrian
she
artist.
She was a famous equestrian. And it's really a fun story to write.
And that family was Russian circus royalty.
Yeah, they were.
They entertained the czars.
Exactly.
And now they entertain us.
We hope so.
One thing we would love for you to do once you have read the book or have gotten to read some of it, do take some time and leave a review for the book wherever you have found it, whether on Amazon or on the website, or take a moment and leave a review. We find that a lot of people are very easy to be critics, but when you read something that inspires you, when you read something that changes the way you look at things, that's always good to pass along to another person. The thing that I have found so fascinating is the women in this book, how the women have shaped each other's lives, how they have prepared Donatalia for the next step in her life.
There's a nice quote from Sarah Driver on the front of the book about the women.
Sarah Driver said, "This imaginative fictional memoir of an aristocratic young ballerina who becomes a fortune teller in a circus after her world falls apart swallowed me. I couldn't put it down. I highly recommend this book to anyone who loves language, history, magic, and the joy of being swept into the life of a complex and riveting female character." So I want to thank you very much, Audrey, Gary as well. Thank you both so much for being so kind and generous with your time, with your energy, with your free time on your vacation. I hope that you will pick up a copy of this book, whether in the shop or online, or go ahead and order it and have it waiting for you at your local bookstore when you get home. I can tell you I have very little free time in my day. I hate to admit how many of these pages are wet because I've read a couple of them in the shower like this. You will enjoy this book, and it will make you think a little bit differently. And I hope that it will make you pull a little closer some of your connections to family, because you'll see how important family is in the telling of this story. Thanks again to Audrey. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for Audrey Berger Wells.
Thank you.